Hey, FUMC Allen family, Pastor Mary Beth here. I want to welcome you to the Hardesty Crouch dining room. Mostly these days, it's been the place where our ninth grader has been doing his school at home work, but I've cleared the table off and put out an extravagant place setting. We've got my mom's sterling silver and our wedding china and our wedding crystal and a nice tablecloth. We don't normally have this out here. We put these things out when we're feeling extravagant or there's a special occasion. And I've done this because this is Maundy Thursday. Maundy Thursday is a day when we remember an extravagant meal and an extraordinary act of love. So it was the Passover, and Jesus told his disciples to go into the city, and they would know him when they saw him, a man who had a place where they could share the Seder together, to have the Passover meal together. And so the disciples did that. They found the man, and he took them to the room where they could have their meal, and they prepared the meal, and at sunset, they gathered around the table. The Passover meal is an extravagant meal with a lot of food for lots of plates, and it's a time to tell stories, to tell the story of God's liberation of the people of Israel from slavery in Egypt. And so I can imagine that they had an extravagant meal, and I can imagine that they told stories and told the story of the Exodus. But then at the end of the meal, Jesus did something completely unexpected. He got up from the table and he took off his robe and he put on a servant's apron and he got a basin and some water and he began to move around the table to kneel at the feet of the disciples, to wash their feet. Wash their feet. Think about your feet for a minute. Where have your feet been today? My feet have been in my tennis shoes today, taking a walk to the park early this morning. Maybe your feet have been in shoes like that. Maybe your feet are tired from standing all day. Maybe your feet have been barefoot this day because you've been working from home. Imagine and think about your feet and think about someone kneeling before you to wash your feet. That makes us uncomfortable. We feel vulnerable. And I think that's what happened for the disciples. They were uncomfortable with this. But I want you to know about feet in those days. Feet in those days didn't have the same kind of shoe protection that we have. And feet in those days walked on streets that were not paved, that were full of muck and mess. And when people came home, their feet were gross. And there was a custom that if you went to someone's house, when you came into their home, there would be someone there to wash the muck and mess off of your feet. But it was always the lowliest servants, because think about it, that would have been a really gross job. It was something that a lowly servant did, not the host. And yet here, Jesus is taking on the role of the lowliest servant to wash the disciples' feet. They were so uncomfortable with this that Peter protested and said, no. But eventually, all 12 sets of feet were washed by Jesus, including Judas's feet. Now, I'm pretty sure that even before they sat down at that table, Jesus knew exactly what Judas was going to do. And still, he ate with Judas. He washed Judas' feet. An extraordinary act of love. Judas left the table at this point, left the room to go do what he was going to do. And I sometimes wonder what Jesus felt at that point. Anger? Fear? Grief? Sadness? For this one who'd been a part of the journey the whole time, gone to betray him. That wasn't the end of the meal. At this point, Jesus returned to the table, put his robe back on, and then he took a piece of bread. It was the afikomen, That's a part of the unleavened bread that during the meal, the Seder meal, is set aside to be consumed at the end of the meal. Afikomen actually means dessert. And for the Jews, it was a sign and a remembrance of the sacrifice of the lamb at the Passover. And Jesus takes that afikomen and he breaks it and he says, "This is my body broken for you." And then he took the cup. It's believed that was one of the 4 cups of wine poured at the beginning of the meal, but one that was never consumed. He took that cup and said to the disciples, "This is my blood poured out for you." An extraordinary act of love, an extravagant meal. This is the story we always tell on Monday, Thursday, when we gather all of us together in person. That's what we do on regular Monday, Thursdays, but this is not your usual Monday, Thursday. We will not be coming together. We will be in our homes. And I want to invite you to consider the possibility of setting a special table for your meal on this Monday, Thursday. And you might put out all the good stuff, or you might put out paper plates. And you might fix something fancy, or it might be chicken nuggets or frozen pizza. But it's the idea of coming to the table intentionally. And I invite you to consider telling this story again, reading from the Gospel of John, the 13th chapter, about how Jesus washes the feet of the disciples. And I wonder what it might be like for whoever's gathered at your table for you to consider washing each other's feet or washing each other's hands. Because you'll notice as you read that, Jesus says, "I have done this for you, so that you may do it for one another." And then I invite you to read one of the stories of the Last Supper, of the breaking of the bread and the sharing of the cup, maybe from Matthew 26. We would be doing that tonight together as we prepared to come to the table, and we would be offering up the prayer of great thanksgiving. And so I invite you around your table to think of 4 things that you and the people who are there are grateful for in this day. And I invite you to post that on Facebook, and maybe even add a 5th. And that the 5th would be that you are grateful that Easter is not canceled. Maybe even make that your hashtag. And maybe even post a link to our live stream worship service on Easter Sunday. An extravagant meal. An extraordinary act of love. That is the story that we tell. Thanks be to God. Shalom.